What you don't know is actually Mike is at home in bed hanging out today. I don't know anything about economic development, but I'm going to entertain you for the next hour. You know, the port exists to do one thing, and really one thing only. The port exists to serve. The way in which the port serves is through economic development. The mandate of the port is to benefit the entirety of South Carolina, all counties, and really a majority of the population, by driving growth in the way that the port can do that. Obviously, the way that we affect growth is through creating unfettered access to and from global markets. So it is our job to ensure that if a manufacturer locates here and needs to source parts from abroad, that they can do that with ease. Our job is to, if a distribution company, a retailer locates here, our job is to ensure that they get the products that they need so that those products can be on the shelves at the right time and for the right cost. And vice versa, if there is a soybean farmer in South Carolina that loses the ability to sell their crop to a facility that closed down in Kershaw, then someone needs to step in and help them get their product to market, the export market that you know, being our path. And so our job, the port's purpose, is to serve. That's something that means a lot to the team, the whole team, actually. We had town halls yesterday with everyone at the port. We actually closed 30 minutes early so that our operators could come in and hear what's going on. We had an employee survey that was the results of which were finished last week. And it's amazing. I went through and read all the comments, and it's amazing. Not, you know, we have 735 employees. Maybe not 735, but a majority, 80%, are of course motivated by the work that they individually do, but they are equally motivated by this larger purpose that they serve, to serve you as a citizen of South Carolina. So that's something that means a lot to the port. And what I'll try to do today is serve you by sharing some commentary that is hopefully interesting, educational, or otherwise useful to you. If there's anything that I don't cover that you want me to cover, I'm happy to do so. We can talk about whatever it is you would like. Maybe I'll start at the macro level, because there's a lot of crazy things going on affecting the supply chain, but everybody else as well. So, of course, I'll address it before someone asks the question. The war in the Middle East, not actually a big impact on us. 1% to 2% of our volume is either bound for or originating from the countries or the ports that are affected by the actions in the Middle East. So that's a very, very small subset of our volume. We have certainly seen some customers cancel bookings. Michelin, for example, had to cancel some bookings that were bound for the Middle East. But it's a very, very small, on the revenue side of the equation, very, very small impact. On the cost side of the equation, it's a little more impactful. Fuel, as a percent of our revenue, accounts for 1.5% of our revenue is tied up in fuel. That spend will certainly increase this year. And we're going to talk about cost because it's something that's really important to us and really to every company in the supply chain right now. But that's a challenge that we need to compensate for. But by and large, the impacts are not so dramatic for us. Tariffs, on the other hand, very dramatic. It is amazing if you look at not just our business. I'm talking at the headline level. If you look at container imports into the US last year. The supply chain works really well when volumes stay within a certain bandwidth. The supply chain is built to absorb a little bit of seasonality in late third quarter, early fourth quarter, and a little bit of softness in first quarter. But much beyond that, and the supply chain is rather brittle. The global supply chain is rather brittle. It's not made for massive volume spikes and massive volume downturns. Most businesses, if you talk to the railroads who are here today, ports, but even trucking companies, warehousing providers, by and large, it's a very high fixed cost business. And so it's very hard to compensate in a downturn, and it's an asset-intense business, so it's very hard to compensate in a volume spike. And so last year, during the 90-day pause on tariffs, we saw really 60 days of volume that accounted for the balance of the rest of the year. In other words, everyone tried to get business into the US, their inventory into the US, for the rest of the year. And that is very, very hard for anyone in supply chain to absorb. And then, of course, having already brought everything in, the resulting downturn thereafter is very hard to compensate for as well, because high fixed cost business, no revenue to cover those fixed costs. Tariffs have been impactful, you all know, in economic development, far beyond just the day-to-day challenges in supply chain or other sectors. It's impacted the way that companies make decisions, or don't make decisions. What we have seen from our customer base anyway is everyone just kind of sat on their hands last year. And they said, I don't know what the costs I'm going to be working under are, and so I cannot lease that building, build that facility, move forward with that endeavor that penciled before, but the now don't know. And so I would contend, if it's 15%, let it be 15%. If it's 100%, let it be 100%. Just let it be stable. If you talk to our biggest customers, Walmart, BMW, I'm not speaking for them, by the way. I think they would say this. If it's 15%, 5% goes to is taken out of the pocket of their suppliers, 5% they absorb, and 5% gets passed on to the consumer. Actually, American business is pretty good at solving these things. We've had many years of some just crazy unknowns and unexpected issues arising. So American business, or maybe global, but American in particular, is really good at solving problems when those problems are known, understood, and relatively consistent. So that's something that we've seen affect our business, not so much in the short term, because the decisions that companies would have made last year wouldn't necessarily have matriculated down into our financials yet, because if you're building a facility, it's 2 years. If you're leasing a facility, it's still 6 months to ramp up. So we didn't realize the impacts of that lack of corporate decision-making last year, but we will realize it this year and next year. We will see softness where there shouldn't have been softness, where companies wanted to move forward in our region and wanted to do more business with us, but deferred the decision until later. So that is a real challenge, I'd say, at the macro level. And what I would tell you, there's a big supply chain conference every year out in Long Beach. It happened 2 weeks ago, and it's a great time to kind of get a pulse of the market. And what I heard over and over and over again from some of the most sophisticated companies with whom we do business or aspire to do business, what I heard time and time again was, tariffs are what they are. We don't know what our inputs are going to cost. We don't know from the time we make a booking, from the time we put a container on a ship in Asia, we don't know actually what the cost is going to be when it arrives on our shores, because there's 30, 40, 50 days delay in transit. And they kind of said, whatever. We've got to move forward. We've got to get back to making decisions. We know we have to serve our customers. We know that the analyses that we were running last year still hold up, and we know we have to make those decisions. So I was actually pretty encouraged. That's anecdotal. We haven't seen that bear out in the data yet. But I was pretty encouraged to hear companies saying, we got to make decisions again. And I think if you talk to some of the commercial real estate brokers and maybe even the developers, although capital markets is another issue, but certainly the brokers, I think, would tell you that we're seeing activity pick up. Thank goodness. It was a long time in the waiting. So that's a real positive, I think, that the business community is kind of getting used to the instability of what their costs are going to be, the instability of tariffs, and they're saying, we got to move forward. So I hope, anyway, and again, this is the feedback that we heard. It all may change tomorrow, but I hope, anyway, that this year is one where companies get back to making decisions, get back to investing, get back to locating new facilities, which they know they need. It seems like that's the path. It seems like that's the direction this year may take. Those are just some thoughts at the macro level. If we then filter down to the supply chain level, kind of the industry in which we work, we see, actually, we are still in, amazingly, we are still in the longest and deepest freight recession that the industry has ever seen. Way worse than 2008, 2009. That's an unbelievable statement. 2008, 2009, for anyone outside of supply chain was the end of the world. I mean, people thought the economy may just kind of stop. People thought this might be the next Great Depression. 25% unemployment, all that kind of stuff was a serious and real concern for many people, for very, very intelligent people. And yet, in our industry, the rebound was painful. It was an extremely deep freight recession and obviously an extremely deep recession. Capital really dried up, et cetera. But it was measured really in months, not in years. The freight recession that we are in right now, in our industry, people are calling it the Great Freight Recession. So it is now 3.5 years old. And depending on the sector of the supply chain in which you work, it may still continue for the balance of this year. That's a challenging thing to deal with. If you have tenants that are warehousing providers, trucking companies, whatever, check their balance sheets. It's a very, very tough time out there. And why is that? It doesn't make sense if the economy is doing pretty well, relatively well, depending on who you talk to. It's not doing poorly. We are unequivocally not in recession. No economists have said over the course of those years that we've been in recession. What we have seen is that during the pandemic, when all of us were stuck at home buying new furniture and rehabbing our homes and new TVs and whatever, well, those things that we were buying last multiple years. You don't buy a sofa every 6 months. And so the money that we spent was really borrowing from the future, if you will. It was really a determination that, look, Americans spend their discretionary income. If you make $100,000 more a year than you did previously, the percentage of that you spend will probably be about the same. If you look at how Americans spend, and we are consumers, we are spenders, that is probably what we are best at. And so in the pandemic, we spent it on things that last a while. And those things generally underpin a lot of the volume that moves through the supply chain. Sofas, right? You can put 40 sofas in a container. It's not like Adidas shoes or shirts or whatever, where you can get thousands of them into a container. And so the volume of containers or the volume of product moving through the supply chain during the pandemic shot up 20-25%. and there was congestion and there were issues. And what everyone in the supply chain did was they all built the church for Easter Sunday. We all overinvested, the entire industry. We overinvested. We hired people that we needed in order to handle the volumes that were moving through. We built, bought, leased, whatever, facilities that were needed in order to handle those volumes. And that was the right thing to do at the time because, volumes remained elevated for multiple years. So many in the supply chain started to say, this might go on forever. The balance has shifted. People aren't going to go back to services. That was wrong-headed, obviously. We look back now and think that was a crazy thought. But that's how people invested, to counteract the congestion in the supply chain, to ensure that people delivered for their customers. Everyone overinvested in capacity. And so when normalization happened, when we all went back to movie theaters and restaurants and taking European vacations and whatnot, the normalization to really what was actually a healthy amount of volume moving through the supply chain did not help the industry or dramatically hurt the industry, because the industry now was built for volumes that were 25% elevated. That overcapacity has held on for longer than anyone in our industry would have ever anticipated. Anyone would have ever thought. And still, in some sectors, holds on today. We're seeing some green shoots for the first time, but tariffs last year kind of extended the freight recession, if you will. And so, unfortunately, more companies still need to go out of business to right-size the supply chain capacity, to get rates to a level that are above cost. I ran a third-party logistics company the last 3 years, and we competed against people who were offering rates that were below their cost. You go out of business, you do that for very long. But that's how desperate people were. Anything just to get cash flow, try and service debt. And so that's the state of the supply chain today. And that fact weighs especially heavily on anyone in the industry. But as we think about our business, we are thinking about how do we compensate for that? What is it that we can do to make up for that? And so I've taken you kind of from the macro level to the industry level. And really what matters is, so what are we going to do about it? So filtering down to our level. Well, our thinking on this is actually quite linear, and it's pretty simple. Our costs are too high. We had 2 town halls yesterday letting the team know costs have to come down. What we have seen since 2018 is our costs have incrementally gone up every year. And what we have seen since 2023 is our volumes have have stepped down over the last couple of years. So we have to address cost. It's very linear. The cost that we allow into our business drives the rates that we can charge our customers. The rates that we charge our customers, if uncompetitive, drive the volumes that move through our port. And so it's very simple. If we want more volumes, then we need to charge lower rates. If we want to charge lower rates, we need lower cost. So we're going through our own reckoning of the last few years. We're probably a little bit late, honestly, but we are right-sizing our business right now for the reality of today, while of course still trying to protect a future of growth. That's a balancing act that for us is challenging. That's something that we don't want to miss on, because the majority of the labor force that we employ is actually pretty skilled. A heavy lift maintenance person who can work on a massive ship-to-shore crane and fix it in the middle of the night when it breaks down sitting over a ship, it takes 3 years to get someone through an apprentice program, to get them just to be able to work next to a more seasoned maintenance person. That is not a labor force that we want to lose. Our operators, our crane operators, staring down between your legs 155 feet below you and hitting a target that big to move containers, and really to move containers at an industry-leading rate. We are the most productive port in North America because our operators are so good. So we have to protect that labor force somehow while still dramatically reducing our cost. So that is the core focus that we have internally right now. Now that's one side of the equation, right? Cost is one side, revenue is the other side. And so while we are attacking cost, we are also attacking growth. How do we grow in a market that is either shrinking or flat? It means we got to take share. We have to take share from the regional and even national ports. We have to take share from the West Coast, from the Northeast, and from our neighbors. There's no other choice but to take share because the market's flat. If the market's growing and you get some wind in your sails, that's relatively easy work. Much harder work is taking share. So of course our rates need to be competitive, but we also need to be extra aggressive on growth. And we're committed to that. Though we are cutting costs elsewhere, we are investing on our commercial side. We are investing in our team. We will be we are in the process of hiring a larger sales team to ensure that we connect with more customers on a more frequent basis. Also, to work with you on projects. We don't want you to ever hear, sorry, I've got a meeting at that time, I can't meet with you and your prospect. Every time you call, one of our people should show up. And will. We're committed to that. We kind of have no other choice, but we're committed to that. So we are in the process of getting extra aggressive on the commercial side. We're also looking with a more critical eye at our CapEx, at our infrastructure spend. We're in a very long cycle business. We're talking right now with DOT about raising the Downholt Bridge so that we can expand North Charleston Terminal. That's a 20-year endeavor. Many of us will be retired before the realization of the bridge project, let alone when we start construction on a new terminal, which is then years in the making. So we have always stayed ahead of our infrastructure need. We've been a rare port in our industry that invests before we reach a capacity threshold. That's been our calling card. That's been something that we've been able to tell economic development prospects, you don't have to worry that we're going to have capacity. We're running at 75, 78% capacity on terminal right now, and we're building a new terminal. Most other ports' infrastructure spend is really predicated on them achieving and surpassing an operating utilization, an operating capacity that is an acceptable level of service to their customers. Or put differently, most ports don't invest in infrastructure until they are behind, until they are having service failures and not able to continue to grow. That's the model in the US. So we've really always bucked that trend. And we remain committed to that concept. But our infrastructure is built. We've got capacity. For the next, as long as it takes, few years, couple years, whatever it may be, we are reallocating CapEx dollars that were initially or originally meant to be towards infrastructure, towards building a second phase of our Leatherman terminal, buying new cranes, whatever it may be. We are reallocating a portion of those dollars to growth. Our CFO thinks I'm nuts. We are taking $30 million that we would have spent on infrastructure, and we're putting that in our sales group's hands. Go grow is the message. Go do deals that have to pencil. We run the same thing as everybody else. We run an IRR and NPV analysis on any investment, but our return threshold is a lot lower because our cost of capital is so low. So if it makes more than our cash sitting in the bank, we will invest in that growth opportunity. If it generates container volume, vehicle volume, or other things, we're gonna invest in it. Now, it's got to move the needle. We will burn through $30 million very quickly. It has to be something that is a game changer for the port. We are there for state projects. We are there for the counties that need support on deals that are important to you. We are there to respond, to be there for the meeting, to offer a compelling proposal. But when we put capital to work, when we invest in projects, it's got to have a material impact on our volumes. Put simply, we can't put $1 million towards 100 new containers. Our goal over the next 16 months is 180,000 incremental containers taken from some other port. So we need projects that bring 10,000 containers, 50,000 containers. Those are the things that we are going to aggressively invest in lots of different ways. It may be us buying land and entitling it. It may be us giving direct concessions as a portion of our margin. It may be us partnering with, I don't know. There's lots of different iterations. But we are not going to let the old way of doing things get in the way of our growth. We are going to take share. We have no other choice. So that's when I always think kind of macro supply chain, what are we doing about it? That's in a condensed version, that is our plan. That is what we are taking to market. That is what we're doing. Now, before someone thinks that we're not committed, for the Navy Base Intermodal Facility, the state's Navy Base Intermodal Facility, I should say, the state contributed $550 million to build an intermodal facility to allow us to continue to grow. Intermodal is containers that move via rail to the hinterland, to Atlanta, to Memphis, to Louisville, to Greer, to Dillon, to places like that. We, of course, remain committed to delivering that capacity. That will be a game changer for us. What we are also committed to is we're working very closely with the railroads, Palmetto Rail, CSX, Norfolk Southern, and they are doing an incredible job of supporting this project. But we are moving that project forward, but being very intentional about just how much infrastructure is really needed in order to open it. And then at what point do we add more capacity? We don't need to build the Taj Mahal. We've done that in the past. We are trying to kind of back off on that and say, we are $170 million over budget on this project. How do we get that to $100 million over budget? We're not getting to flat. I wish I could tell you we would. But that is a core need, and we are extremely fortunate for the partnership of the railroads in finding ways to do that. Actually, Norfolk Southern's leadership was in town this week. We had dinner. I got a very nice note the next day, and they said, man, we've made more progress in the last 3 months than we made in the last 3 years on this project. The project is outlasting the project managers. That's a problem. We need to land the plane. We need to get to operating agreements. We need to get to what the infrastructure is going to be, and we are committed to that. We are a fiduciary of the state's dollars on this project, and we're going to deliver it. But we're going to deliver it in a competitive way so that we are able to take share. So that is maybe the only infrastructure that we remain committed to. Everything else, we defer, we delay, we fill what we have, and we put our dollars towards growth projects. Another component of, another advantage that we have as it relates to growth, I just ran kind of back of the napkin math. We have about 1,000 acres around the state of underutilized property. In the past, if it wasn't container generating or vehicle generating, we didn't look at it. We have a very different mentality today. We're not too proud. If it is a domestic-only opportunity that could locate on our acreage and we could generate revenue that we can reinvest into our core business, making us more competitive, which ultimately drives more economic development, growth, and activity, absolutely, we'll do that. We have 100 acres in Dillon. We want to monetize that. I'm not saying sell. I don't want to sell it. We want to monetize it via economic development projects and partnerships with other folks who can bring new and creative ways to do business. We have our West Rock paper mill next to the North Charleston terminal. That's a couple hundred acres of property that we don't need as a container terminal for some 20-odd years. We're not just going to let it sit fallow for 20 years. We are going to monetize every acre of it with an understanding that there's a timeline on that, right? And we're going to do it in all sorts of creative ways. We have more projects right now than we have acreage at the West Rock property. More projects looking and considering it. And half of them have nothing to do with containers or vehicles. Some of them are international shipping related. Some of them aren't. We've got a data center looking out there. I don't know if we do that deal, but sure. If they can underwrite where the facility is built and then taken back down in 20 years, absolutely. For the core purpose of taking that revenue taking that profit, that margin, and reinvesting it into our container and finished vehicle segment so we can be more competitive, so we can offer lower rates, so we can grow. What is clear to us, as grows the port, so grows the state. As grows the state, so grows the port. We have to make sure that we can absorb everything that the state needs us to absorb, or rather the companies that select this state. But we equally have to be doing our part. We have to be driving deals to the state, directly and indirectly. It always amazes me, Boeing, which does precious little business with us. I think they do like 2 containers a month through our port, which makes them completely irrelevant. We don't call on them, they're useless to us. And yet, I'm sorry, I don't mean that use, that sounds aggressive. And yet, Boeing is one of the greatest wins for South Carolina ever. One of the things that they cited when they were looking for a location was proximity to a port. I scratched my head. I don't know why. 2 containers through our port, it doesn't matter. They don't need to be in Charleston. They could be somewhere else. There's lots of other airports with good labor forces where they could locate. But they perceived a need way back when. We absolutely have to continue to grow. We absolutely have to be a going concern in the top 10 US container ports in order to drive those kind of projects indirectly. And so to do so means to increase our revenue base in traditional and non-traditional ways. That's what we're working on. Now, I think there are some realities that we are facing right now that are hard to share. I sat down with our commercial team and said, okay, give me your 4 biggest challenges. What are the biggest problems that you face in generating growth? And we're going to tackle them one after the other. Number 2 on the list was lack of state support. Lack of interest in this state for the number 1 driver of volumes in our business. We are a manufacturing state, right? That's what gets us out of bed in the morning. We're a manufacturing port. We're actually the only major US container port, the only top 10 US container port whose number 1 commodity is manufactured goods. We're the only one. That's an amazing stat. We have benefited so much from BMW, from Michelin, from the various and sundry manufacturers in this state, and we will continue to support them. Our business is completely dedicated to a supply chain for manufacturers. No port operates that way. Our efficiency, our focus on really white glove service is not found in other port markets. But it's because the legacy of the advanced manufacturing in the state and the expectations that those companies have. They expect on a Friday night when they call us and say, hey, I'm gonna have a line go down if I don't have this one item from this one container by Sunday at 2 in the afternoon, that we will respond. Ports don't do that in the US. So we are unbelievably dedicated to the benefits of manufacturing. But manufacturing accounts for 11% of GDP. If you look 20 years ago, manufacturing accounted for 11% of GDP. The hope, the dream that manufacturing will account for 30% of GDP someday because of tariffs, because of reshoring, because of whatever, that is a dream. The South remains a compelling place for advanced manufacturers. High on the value chain commodities make sense in the US, but the rest of the value chain does not. We will never again make shoes and t-shirts, computers, and things of that nature in the US. We don't have the labor force for it. And our labor force does not want to do it. And we as consumers have shown time and again, we're not willing to pay for it. No one wants $550 Nikes. We want them to be $100. So the challenge that the sales team brought, the number 2 thing on the list was consumption of tangible goods, what moves in a container, personal consumption, accounts for 23% of GDP. If you add capital goods, it's almost double. The drivers of the US supply chain are retailers. If you look at the top importers into the US, they're all retailers. That is a reality that we struggle with in this state. There is not an appetite, there's not a strong interest for retail distribution. What I would tell you, something I've learned, not just in the last 6 months, but in the 11 years I was at the port previously, is there are people who want those jobs. There are people who are never gonna reach the level of advanced manufacturing because actually that's a pretty high level. The people working on BMWs and Boeing airplanes are not just turning a wrench. I mean, they are educated, they are advanced manufacturing employees. And there is a major subset of the population that will never achieve that, no matter the programs that we put in place. I would encourage you, let's serve the rest of the population. If you don't do it for the people who won't achieve that level of education and be able to work in manufacturing, consider it this way. If the top 30 importers into the US drive where ships call, then the manufacturers ride on those ships. The manufacturers depend on a resilient supply chain driven, or an adequate capacity in the supply chain driven by the retailers. Manufacturing needs retail distribution. That is something that we have learned time and again. We see it in Savannah. They were a retail distribution port, nothing else. But today they are winning manufacturing projects because of the heft that they enjoy in the supply chain industry. That was our number 2 challenge from our commercial team. So if there is an ask, I guess you say, don't hate on distribution centers. They're not so bad. They serve a purpose in getting you to the ultimate wins that you want, manufacturers. That is a purpose that in order to be a healthy and compelling container port, in order to continue to be a driver, direct and indirect, of projects to this state, that is the number one thing that we need. That's the number one thing. So that's something that we think a lot about. And that's partially why we have allocated so much of our cash to projects, because I know it's hard for the state to incentivize things that are not as exciting as advanced manufacturing. But we're still asking for your help. If nothing else, give us a call. Don't tell the project that we don't incentivize those things. Let us step up. We will. So that's kind of macro, supply chain, and us. I think kind of going back to the top, the port exists to serve. We serve by being a for-profit business. We serve by being a compelling business to our customers, a place that grows above market. Of our 4 priorities internally right now, number 2, above market growth. It's not growth. Our priority is not growth. Our priority is above market growth. If the US port industry grows by 5%, we should grow by 8%. If the US port industry contracts by 5%, we should contract by 2%. That is what our team is driving towards. Now, we got to get our house in order. We got to get some things fixed. We've got to address cost, et cetera. We have the stomach for it. But you will see that we start to deliver. We get back to the days when we consistently delivered above market growth. We have to do that. If we care to serve the state, if we care to serve the 1 in 9 people who benefit from jobs that are direct and indirectly related to the port, then we have to be committed to an above market growth story. We have to compensate for the share that we have lost. We have to compensate for the challenges of the last few years. And that we're dedicated to. That's all I have. I don't know if I answered the last 6 months' thoughts, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
We do have time for questions. That was awesome. Any questions? I knew you would have one, Rob. Where's the cube?
Coming. I do not have the
TSF.
throw of Sergio, so I will have, no. There's still beverages there.
Micah, thank you. I've lived in South Carolina 12 years, and I'm fascinated by the port. Perhaps there's someone else in here more fascinated than I am, but there wouldn't be very many. I heard you talk a lot about cost. I mean, is cost really the driving factor? I assume we're competing with Savannah mostly, but anything you can tell us about just the inside, what is it that makes our port special that we can be driving home, and is it really just cost? And so we're really just looking at you to help us.
Thank you for the question. For our direct customers, and that's an important distinction, our direct customers are the shipping lines. Those are our contractual counterparties, the people that pay us for the services of loading and unloading ships. Today, the shipping line industry, for the first time in several years, is in an is in a rates are kind of have fallen off a cliff and continue to be soft. The rates that their customers pay them for the benefit of riding on their ships. That subset of the supply chain, that sector in the industry enjoyed outrageous profits the last few years on account of various and kind of discrete and unique things. So for example, the closure of the Red Sea to shipping last year because of the Houthi rebels, that actually bolstered the shipping line's rates because it removed capacity. That they were just like everybody else. They had too much capacity. Too many ships were built and delivered. And when you can no longer go through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea and instead have to go around South Africa, you have to put more ships into rotation to carry the same amount of cargo. And so it was an artificial lever, an artificial capacity constraint that then drove rates up. So the shipping lines, even though they are really in an overcapacity environment like the rest of the supply chain, they have enjoyed rates that don't align, rates that don't make sense until you kind of understand the nuances that they are dealing with. Today, or really starting towards the end of last year, the rate to ship a container from Shanghai to Charleston, for example, really fell off a cliff and remains low. And so in times like these, when the shipping lines, when our customers are under pressure, when their margin has eroded, or when they're loss-making, which is really where most of them are right now, they become nothing more than procurement organizations. The service that we offer them, none of that matters anymore. And everything is about cost. And so that's where we're at right now. They are hammering us on cost. And this is the first time ever, where we are more expensive than Savannah. So that can't last. They will shift discretionary containers, so containers moving inland that can unload in our port, unload in Savannah, unload in Norfolk, unload in Mobile, whatever. They have the latitude to decide where those containers are offloaded, and for $5 a container, they will choose another port. It's not an exaggeration. $5 a container, they'll say, we'll just drop those in another port. So yes, right now, it's a short-term thing, but right now, there's nothing more important than cost. That's our direct customers. Our indirect customers is really what matters to us. That's the manufacturers, the retailers, the folks who own the cargo. They really dictate the long-term growth and the long-term success of any port. For example, New York. New York has this massive population right on their doorstep. No shipping line wants to go to New York. They are the most expensive and offer the worst service. You pay for the right to go to New York even though you hate to. And yet, because of the population density, the consumer basket sitting right on their doorstep, the shipping lines will forever call there. It does not matter what New York charges. They can charge anything. It does not matter the level of service they offer. For us, if we are able to build a localized or a regionalized freight base that is dependent on our port geographically, the shipping lines have to come here. But that's a long cycle effort, right? Convincing a company to build a facility here, to buy, to lease, whatever, that's not something that can turn quickly. That's years of analysis and building and all the rest. And so in the short term, it's all about cost. In the long term, it's about service. It's about what we do when we show up with the cargo owners. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Micah, what are you hearing from the DCs? I mean, what does help look like? Because you mentioned state, help from the state and maybe even local level. We're sitting on about 5.5 million square feet of empty, brand new spec development in Berkeley County. It's given us an opportunity to get our foot in the door for manufacturing, which is always a win for us, right? But with the tax structure the way it is in South Carolina, how we tax manufacturing versus distribution, where's the meat on the bone and what are they asking for?
Right now, I hope there's no developers in the crowd, but right now, no developers who have any of those buildings in your area. But right now, I mean, the ability to negotiate for a lower lease rate and front-end concessions are actually a pretty big driver. But last year, no one made decisions. This year, I think that's changing. We're really seeing that change anecdotally in discussions with our customers. But maybe to put it differently, when a distribution center is looking at a region, they're looking at a region. They have already pinpointed, our store network or our regional distribution center network or our e-commerce requirements suggest that we need to be in the southeast in a southeastern port. They've made that determination. They're not going to say, we'll look at Seattle or Charleston. They won't do that. Once they have determined this is the region they want to be in, there are two experiences that they get sometimes. This is the downside case. They go to Georgia, the port, the state, the county, all the economic developers get in one room and they present a coherent and partnership-based approach. Often, and I have heard this from customers directly, often we hear about the deal too late. They've already made a now market level decision. And they say, well, gosh, we called your state, or we called your county, or we called your whatever economic development entity that they connected with. And the message they get is, ho-hum, we're not that interested. My only ask is, just don't tell them that. Tell them to call us. We'll do the legwork. We'll go incentivize it. We'll do whatever's needed. If you're not interested. If you do want to partner, we would love to sit in one room together, pitch together, solve the problems they have together. Ultimately, we think it's all financial analysis and everything. They've already determined that our market works when they sit down with us. The decision on where to, you all know this, the decision on where to locate a facility actually comes down to a very personal decision. Do they believe that the people on the other side of the table sincerely care about them and will help them when things go wrong? Because they will. Things will always go wrong. They know, they can sense when someone sits on the side of the table and says, we'll do what it takes to get you here, but after that, you're on your own. I'm not saying people say that. But we want to show them, we want to go arm in arm and show them a compelling vision of how they will be taken care of even after they have decided to locate here. Does that answer your question, Bid?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
One more question?
Yes, sir, Bob.
Oh, Bob? Bob? Be a team player. Come on.
Let's focus on the positive. To your point, South Carolina's been a forward-thinking port. Maybe give a nugget to everybody, if in fact it is a nugget, but I believe it to be, to use in their sales pitch the benefit of being a first and last out port, which the forward thinking and getting our harbor to our current depth and exceeding our competitors. So I think maybe that would be a message that they could communicate.
Thank you, Bob. The easiest pitch, I would center it on a couple of things. Number one, there are no limitations to a company doing business in and out of our port, nor using the supply chain that is built, that's beyond, our terminals, using the supply chain that is built in our market. You can't say that about a lot of port markets right now. Nobody wants to go to the West Coast. They're just pain in the ass ports. Northeast, no better. Really, the ports that are compelling, Houston, Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk sometimes. The difference, we don't have a labor problem here. Savannah has a massive labor problem. It's a 350,000 population market, and the labor rates in that market continue to not incrementally go up, but jump up. There's just not enough people, and their population is not growing fast enough. They're out. We're not. We have labor force. I know that. I was an employer in Charleston, Greenville, Atlanta, and Savannah for the last 3 years. I know firsthand. We have plenty of labor force. You have to be a compelling company. You have to be a kind employer. We have plenty of labor force. We have plenty of infrastructure. There is nothing that holds us back. We have more capacity today than is needed probably for the next several years. And we have a second phase of our Leatherman terminal, a third phase of our Leatherman terminal still to build, and then multiple phases of North Charleston terminal. We have a path. We are 2.5 million TEU, 2.5 million containers a year. We have a path to 8.5 million right now. A path sounds like it's a maybe. We own the land. It's mostly permitted. Nobody in the U.S. port industry has a path to infrastructure growth that we have. So you enjoy unfettered access to the global markets in Charleston. I think those two things matter a lot. And then the third is much more touchy-feely. There is not a port in the U.S. that will work as hard, that is as scrappy and dedicated to serving its customers and finding solutions when everything goes wrong, because that's the supply chain. Everything always goes wrong. There is not a U.S. container port that acts like we do. We actually act like a small third-party logistics company. We act more like that than we do a port. And don't take that from me, ask our customers. BMW says, hey, we want to realize a more efficient supply chain. We want you to build it in the port. 18 months later, here's your inland port. That's the kind of stuff we're committed to doing. There is not a U.S. container port out there today that will work as hard for their customers. Does that answer it, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to first in, last out. Is that a benefit? Is first in, last out benefit because of the depth of the harbor and maybe some of our competing ports that can't take a ship fully laden?
I don't know what first in, first out means.
It just means that arriving from foreign ports, the ship stops at the first port of call, and departing to foreign ports, this is the last port of call before going foreign. I don't think it makes, I wish it did, I don't think it makes a big difference. What people care about is what are their costs going to look like? Is there a trajectory for, if they're going to deliver a 30-year asset, is there a 30 years worth of capacity in the market? Is there labor, and is there a partner who's going to help them when things go wrong? I think that's what I hear from our customers. I may be wrong, but we do have unfettered access. We have the most incredible harbor compared to any of our competitors. That is a fact.
Thank you for the questions. Micah, I'm so glad you're back, brother.